Okay, in 1981, there is an immense, great amount of slasher films. You have Fright Nights, you have My Bloody Valentine, Night School, The Burning, Halloween Part 2, Hell Night, and Friday the 13th Part 2, Happy Birthday to Me, and we're going to talk about one that really doesn't get talked about, but I think is one of the best ones that should be talked about, all those ones together. Not only that, in 1981, we have Blowout. We just talked about Blowout. The beginning of Blowout is a parody, but they aren't seriously making a slasher movie.
Yeah.
So 1981 is the year of slasher. We're going to talk about one of them here.
Yeah, we're talking the Prowler today. And as a former Prowler from Lincoln High School in Thief River Falls, I'm ready to go with this one. Welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from Goethe Film Reviews.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, and once again, hit the like, subscribe button, tell your friends, tell your girlfriends, and everybody about the show. Thanks for watching, and thanks for the new listeners and new subscribers and new watchers. We greatly appreciate it. Today we're going to kick off talking about horror movies for October with one of them that I think gets kind of lost in the shuffle and doesn't really get talked about a lot, but is I think a horror film footnote, The Prowler.
Yes, absolutely. So The Prowler begins. It's the end of the school year of 1980, and Avalon Bay is resurrecting a classic tradition in the graduation ball, which hasn't been celebrated since 1945 when two of the students were brutally murdered with a pitchfork. It would seem that history is set to repeat itself as the killer has returned to take on a whole new slew of fresh meat. And with the sheriff out of town, it's up to a young, inexperienced deputy to catch him before it's too late.
So, this movie has the worst dad joke I've ever heard in my entire life. When he goes to the grocery store, yeah.
Deodorant one?
Yeah.
Oh man, I wrote it down. I'm using it all the time.
Can I get you anything more? Deodorant. No sweat, man. It's the worst dad joke ever. I completely forgot about it when we were watching it. Oh man.
Well, we both have been fans of the Horror Geek. Is that the name?
Yeah.
And he kind of pointed out too. It's a joke so bad he wouldn't have used it.
Yes.
Then again, maybe.
Yeah.
So,
maybe.
But man, when I watched that, I was like, oh, that's so great. I have to write it down and I have to use it right now. So I waited till the wife came home.
No, this is sad because we have a green screen behind us, but we're gonna put the poster up and everything. But we should just kept it green because throughout the whole movie, it's almost overly green. Everything, even the inside the walls. Even the bad guy dressing up in green and grass and everything. It's constantly green everywhere in this movie.
See, to not show that poster would be not showing off a great piece of art. Because I really dig the poster for this movie.
Yeah.
It's rare to have a poster that really captures the spirit of the movie, and that's how this poster looks. Because you got that big brooding, the fatigues killer, and he's got the girl's head wrapped around and like he's ready to maul and maim. And I think that, like you said, 1981, there's a reason this film got forgotten. And it's because it was in a slew of slashers. With 1978's Halloween not being the first official slasher, but it definitely created the modern slasher film.
Right.
And The Prowler was part of the slew of copycats and ripoffs that came out. And some of them had to be memorable and some of them had to be forgotten. And it's just kind of the way that plays out.
Also, this is kind of the similar story. This kind of runs the same story almost as My Bloody Valentine. Mm-hmm. And of course, that gets far more talked about and discussed and actually a little more praised than The Prowler. And I think that's one of the reasons why people kind of forget about this movie, because the stories are roughly kind of the same. It's almost like Batman, 1989, Batman, and Dick Tracy. It's almost kind of the same story, which is why Dick Tracy kind of gets lost in the conversation, because it's very similar. Now, what works with The Prowler is it's slow. It starts really slow.
Mm-hmm. And I would argue that for me, who's going to look at it a bit more on the mixed side of things, the slowness doesn't bother me. It's that you fill that space with really bad cannon fodder. All of our to-be-killed people are so immemorable that it bothered me that, when you watch, it might be that I've just watched the Friday the 13th sequel so many times, but when you watch one of the great sequels from Friday the 13th, it's more along the lines of all those characters are very memorable people. Whether or not you like them is completely up to you, but they're very memorable, and when they die, it's a memorable death. And in this part, the only part of the character that is memorable is the death by Tom Savini.
Yeah. So, it's director Joseph Zito, and working makeup and special effects is Tom Savini.
Yeah, he got hired on because of Maniac, if I'm correct. He did a really great job of kind of putting the glow effects for that film, and that got him this role. And it's kind of funny that he got this role because of Maniac. Joseph Zito moved on to Friday the 13th, the final chapter, because of this film, and then he dragged Savini back to the franchise he helped create.
Right, yeah. So I think it's funny that I think Part 2, Friday the 13th Part 2 came out couple months before this movie did, and eventually they get work together on part 4. Tom Savini, I think, really outdoes himself with the kills in this movie. I think that's what saved this movie, is his wonderful way of making the movie, especially when he pulls the knife out of the guy's head and the head moves. Yeah. That is wonderful.
There's a few moments. There's one where I think like the bayonet kill, where like you can see the bayonet move and it looks like it's moving through the neck. Like, how is it happening? There's a lot of stuff like that that's really, really well done kills. And I try not to grant a film credence based on its effects work, based on its kills, because I don't like being the guy who just like really focuses on the death in horror movies, because it's not about the death as much for me. It's just like the fun fear of it all. And I don't like to push the gore idea because gore does not save a film. But yeah, Savini's work is just, it's so tantamount to like saving grace for this movie, because it makes the film more memorable. You know, it kind of adds that layer to it. That gore is insane.
I know. I don't know how the mechanics of having this prosthetic when he pulls the knife back out of the guy's head, that the jaw and everything.
Is that the one through the top and off the chin?
And then his eyes go white, and then he it's wonderful. It looks
so it was a fake head. I saw this video. I watched the behind the scenes on that one, and they actually had the guy down here, and he was moving his arms, kind of like that decapitation of Betsy Palmer in Friday the 13th one. So he was kind of laying down and using the hands. And so it wasn't as like intricate of like hiding him underneath something. They just didn't have the camera show him, and he used his arms to touch his face. But it was a fake head. So anything you're seeing is probably the manipulation of the knife and the fingers on the face. But again, it's really clever stuff, and it was smart with a film, because you've got all these slashers competing. That's where you're going to win, is with your effects work. Like, that's the only way that you can really outdo them, is have memorable effects work. And I like that they modeled the entire film. They would purposely make the shooting work around the effects. Sometimes taking a day or more to prep an effect.
Well, that's where we talk about, that's where you're winning. So where you're winning, you really emphasize what's concentrated at, let's get that right. And I think where it doesn't really work is, we already talked about, the characters are very not memorable, unforgettable. The story doesn't really mix all that well. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but it's another catalyst to get your slasher involved.
There's a seed of a good idea, I think, with dealing with trauma and dealing with the way that we see our veterans as they return from war. There's like seeds of really great ideas, and the film, other than the effects work, so many elements of it kind of reach this area where they could burst out from being like mediocre, and they could really capture something interesting. Every time they get close enough, they kind of veer away again. I didn't really like Vicky Dawson's Pam McDonald. I really didn't like Christopher Goutman as Mark London, our deputy.
He's kind of looks like Christopher Walken, doesn't he?
Everyone kind of called him, discount store Christopher Walken. Part of me is just that I don't really understand, like, I don't understand why he's our hero, because I don't think he does much for heroics. You know, he's kind of not really a dirtbag, but he's kind of just like, he's not an extremely nice guy. He's not a likable.
It's not projected as like an overall person that you root for.
And I don't buy for a second that
even if it's unintentional or intentional, but somebody like you just give me creepy vibes.
And I don't buy for a second that someone that like him would be put in charge of a town. Like when I, as the sheriff, I'm leaving, I'm going on my, a person's been murdered and I'm gonna go fishing because I have to. And then you get him kind of placed with all this extra amount of process that he's got to go through because he's a good boy. Like, that's, I don't buy for a second that anyone would trust him with the town. And then he's in charge of a whole town, and there's a killer on the loose. So what does he do? He's gonna go get some like fresh time with this girl at the dance. I don't know.
It's like I said, the story, but what saves it is the kills.
And I think Zito does a great job with atmosphere in the film. You talk about this a lot with how you view your horror films, as you seem to me like a guy who loves atmosphere. And that's very much what this film has, and it's something he carried forward to his fourth Friday film, is there's a tremendous amount of atmosphere in both of those movies.
This could be almost like a teenage dance look. If it wasn't, if you kick out the horror of it, it almost looks like a very authentic, like, teenage.
It reminded me of some of the Risky Business kind of exterior shots where they've got this, kind of filter of dreamlike quality to them, or some of the exterior work in The Keep, not the interior, like,
the village
exterior, villages and stuff. That's kind of how I felt this film, or even closer to the slasher movie in Blowout. Like, it feels kind of like that. Like, that's why we kind of joked about Blowout. We're like, I think you're supposed to like laugh at the cheesiness of that horror film at the beginning of Blowout, and we both were kind of like, well, I kind of want to see that movie.
We want to see that because he's the bad guy's breathing down. But yeah, I think that's where you're winning is the slasher parts, how the prosthetics and the overall look of it. It has a very dreamy quality because you're talking about two different timelines, talking about the 1940s up to early 80s. And now it has time now stuck in a time warp where everything it looks like 80s, what 40s looks like.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, but it has this nice sense. They did shoot the pool scene. That is hard to do, especially when you get shots in the pool.
Well,
and it's not the greatest day outside to do it.
And I gotta keep wondering who keeps giving Joseph Zito pool scenes, because if you've watched Crystal Lake Memories, they talk about how in that film he got in a lot of trouble fighting. He actually fought the Jason actor because they kept shooting takes on this scene in the water, and the woman was getting hypothermia. She was naked in the water, and she was getting hypothermia in the cold. The same thing happened during this film, that it was like freezing October temperatures. It was like the film in the fall. Right? Yeah, and she's like freezing to death out there in the pool, and it's like, Joe, pick a different spot. Move your action if you can't handle not killing people for real. Which brings me to another point too. Joseph Zito actually was asked by a guard at a movie theater he went to if he really killed people in the making of the movie. So there's a win to you right there, and he says that's a win as a director. Is that he really believes that you may have actually done the deeds that you claim to have done.
Now the sheriff is played by Farley Granger, and he's an accomplished actor of the 40s and 50s. He did a lot of noirs. He's actually, I think he was one of the actors on Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on the Train.
Yep. And Rope.
And you have the legendary noir actor Lawrence Tierney. He's in a wheelchair, and all of a sudden he just goes away, which is kind of funny.
Well, he's not there to begin with. I mean, he's in the movie, yes.
He's in the movie, but
he at no point is playing a character.
No,
I'm fairly certain that they just lived by Lawrence Tierney, and they just kept putting cameras up to his window. Like, they keep telling me they shot that stuff at a museum, and I'm like, there's no way.
Right,
he's just hanging out with a wheelchair he stole from somebody, and
I don't want to stand for this movie, right? Yeah, because we see him in Reservoir Dogs, he can stand and talk, like 92, but here he just sits there, and then all of a sudden we don't see him ever again.
There's a story when he was on Seinfeld where he stole the knives out of like Jerry's apartment, and like not supposed to even be there, and he just like walked on the set and he just stole these knives, and like Jerry had to like confront him about it, and he lied and said, I don't have the knives, and they made fun of that in the show later, but that's how I believe Lawrence Tierney was, is I believe that he was next door, and they were like, we just got to get him in this movie, because he doesn't speak a line of dialogue, am I right?
No.
And we see him inside the house, we see his head, so again, it's like they could have just taken a picture,
right,
and then they catch him like outside, he's like, hey, give me your hand, and then that's all we see of him.
Right, and in fact, they go in his house, and we still don't see him.
Yeah, so there's two theories I have. Right. He either was so much of a problem on set that they just were like, screw it, we're just going to get rid of that subplot, because this film is overwrought with subplots.
Yeah. And
I feel like one of them might have had something more to do with him, or maybe to set him up as a bad guy, or number two, they just, like I said, they just put him in the film for a name, and he maybe did one afternoon's worth of shooting. You know, kind of like how Betsy Palmer said for her role in Friday the 13th, she only did like a day or two of shooting, but she was like, I need to pay for my car. Like, he might have just needed a quick buck to pay his, loan sharks.
Yeah.
And they just
one of the other
him in for an afternoon.
Cut his scenes, cut the story, or just, this is what I want to do to be in the movie, and take a check, leave.
Yeah, because I feel like Tierney, and it might just because he looks like Marlon Brando, but Tierney and Marlon Brando were probably both the same kind of on-screen presence of just like, get them in, get them to film, and get them out.
But it has all the ingredients that you like for a slasher movie. It has great slasher in the scenes. Tom Savini does great work with how he projects the kills and everything. You have your formula works at the end. You have a slight surprise. I don't know. I kind of figured it out, when I first time watched it, about halfway through what's going on.
Are we talking about the non-spoiler killer reveal?
Yeah.
I thought about it, I think about 40 minutes in. Because part of it, I think, is that the film either believes it's cleverer than you, or it knows that you're going to figure it out, so it doesn't try. And I can't tell which one it is, but I mean, there's kind of like
so many
40 minutes in, you're like, I'm pretty sure that this is how this movie's going to play out. And I'm like, I really hope that I'm wrong, because there was a few moments where they kind of turn you a little bit, make you think something else. It's got some whodunit vibes that are pretty good, but then once you really start to think in, you're like, I don't think it's actually as clever as I'm trying to make it.
No.
But like you said, there's a great score from Richard Einhorn. That score actually was just recently released on vinyl. Because it was such a popular score for the film.
Hey, they got a live band that still you can listen to their music on YouTube. Nowhere Fast, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they were going nowhere fast. But the other thing that I have a problem with is the editing from Joel Goodman. Now, Joel Goodman went on to do things like The Abyss. He did the Friday the 13th final chapter with Zito. It's like I pointed out there, like that slow burn works if you've got more going on, and there's a lot in this film that feels very much like not going on. There's also a lot of weird shots where like they'll show the killer in his fatigues and his hat, and he's just in a room turning, and then they don't show him again for like 10 minutes, and it's like, what was the point of showing us one quick shot of that?
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
There's a lot of things like that just don't add up editing wise, and I think a film that had something like Savini, I would have gone all out. I would have put all my money into those effects, and I would have blanketed this screen with blood. I would have just killed everybody.
That's right. There's not as much as you think in this movie. Especially
there's large stretches without.
Yeah, yeah. The more you think about it, it's like that was kind of a bloodless slasher almost. But right, they take the emphasis like they got these fabulous cars, so they're gonna shoot different varieties of these cars. Will take forever shooting them, even though they're like nice and everything.
You're talking about 40 scenes.
Yeah.
So again, like editing that stuff in at the beginning. There's so much exposition because they show us this opening film reel, and then we read a letter that we have to actually read. No one's reading it to us. Like, we got to get in there and dig out the details, and it's like a rainy, like, smutty kind of letter.
It's almost like the Casablanca letter.
Yeah, the Casablanca letter, right, to pause and catch that one, too.
Yeah.
And then we get this large 45 sequence, and I think, like, why is the MC there telling jokes about cocaine use or something? They're like, the men are covering their noses, and I'm like, what does that even mean? There's that whole part there where, like, we don't need that. We just want to get the people who are going to get killed. Then we jump to the 80s, and there's, like, extensive talk about this Rosemary and about her father and what happened to him and, like, how he shut down. Like, they give you the entire, like, mythology. They give you more mythology than Lord of the Rings does in, like, 20 minutes. Like, it's so much. And then finally you get to the kills, and that's where the film starts to pick up pace, but it's just kind of too late for me to really feel like I want to go back to this movie in the same way that I do others.
All right. So overall, I think if you like slasher movies, you're gonna like this movie. Overall movie, there are some flaws to it. I do like the aesthetic. I do like the dream quality of it. I do like the kills of it. But I agree with you. It does take a long. You get an exposition dump in the beginning, and it takes a long time to develop. And it has a lot of things that you could have cut down. Even though there's great shots in here, and it's one of the things that, especially with an editor, you're like, oh, that looks great. We keep that in. You really did that scene nice. So why don't we keep that? For an editor, we're probably like, we're wasting time. We got to go. Yeah. So there definitely some, I wouldn't say pacing, but just choices of where you put things, because you want to like the dance, cut the dance to the people outside the park. Quiet noise. You want to do that contrast, doesn't really pay out very well.
Yeah, there's just too much that's unneeded. So that you have the effect, but then you also have it with unneeded sequences too. So you enjoy the film. I'm a little mixed on it, where like I really respect certain technical elements of the film.
I agree.
And I think if you're a fan of Tom Savini, if you like the gore and the carnage, this is a movie to at least check out. I don't know if I'm going to revisit it on the same level that I do with other Tom Savini films. He called it his greatest work. I don't know if I'd say greatest, but it's definitely upper echelon.
I would say
great.
I think the effects are far cleverer than he thinks it.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're great effects work, but it's just I wish that there was a better casing for them. And I really wish that maybe I'd look differently on this film because I'm such a franchise guy when it comes to horror movies. I love just like marathoning some franchise stuff. Right. If there was a sequel, maybe they could have improved upon some of the elements of this film and really dug into, I think, like the trauma elements, the PTSD elements that could be at play, instead of just kind of like giving you a nibble and then taking it away. Yeah. But I am a little mixed on the film, although I will say it is worth at least one viewing. Maybe you'll feel differently than I do.
Yeah, and like Greg, I think if you like slasher movies, you'll appreciate it.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, if you could stick to 81 slasher movies, there's another one I forgot to mention at the beginning. Happy Birthday to Me. That was another one, a great one.
Which is another one that suffers from excessive pacing issues. It's like it's a 2-hour movie, and you're just like, what is going on? I watched this on my birthday last year, my 30th birthday. Everyone was locked down, and I told the wife, I was like, I want to watch this movie, and I want to open it up for the first time and check it out. And yeah, that's the kind of the same problem, is that like there's a lot of exposition in both of these films, and that's maybe one of the reasons why they've got that cult level of appreciation but never burst onto the scene. Yeah, is because there's some great elements to both, but there's also some things that other films have just done better. You know, Friday the 13th has refined this process pretty well.
Have you seen The Prowler? Or better yet, if you have any other the movie mentions that we talked about at the beginning of Slasher Foods you want us to talk about, feel free to join the Patreon and tell us how to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below, what you thought about The Prowler, or for our international markets, Pitchfork Massacre, Rosemary's Killer, or The Pitchfork of Death, which would be alternate titles of the film.
Yeah.
This thing almost has more titles than Scissors. But
why is it a military man within a pitchfork?
Right? Why farm? It's the whole thing too with Jason in part 5, I think, when he's got or no, it's part 6 where he's got the farmer's outfit. And it's like, why is Jason a farmer all of a sudden? But let us know your thoughts on the film. We're really interested in hearing about them. It's one of our favorite parts of the show. Yeah. And then don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out that Patreon. Once again, folks, you can find all my film reviews on GoFilmReviews.com.
You can find the St. Paul Filmcast anywhere you find podcasts where they interview independent local filmmakers from the Twin Cities area.
Definitely. So until next time, keep your horror hats on. We got more coming to you here in October.